Hi everyone, this is Dave from Mountbatten Estates, and today I'm joined with Joshua Jackson from Bright Hill. They are a property development company based in London, and I've known Joshua for a little while now. He's using one of our VAs, our virtual assistants, to help him find some sites. I thought it might be prudent to get him on a call today, maybe just find out a little bit how he's working with the VA, what he's maybe doing quite correctly, where to find some sites, and maybe delve into a site that he just recently tied up and see if we can maybe try and extract some real good value there. So, Joshua, thank you so much for jumping on the call today. How are you doing?
Yeah, welcome. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, all good. Excited to kind of share.
Brilliant. So, Joshua, you're working with a VA. Tell me a little bit about your business, your property developers, and what type of sites do you typically look for?
Yeah, really look for PD sites. We would look at sort of more detailed sites, but there's a stepping stone for us because we're relatively young as a business and experience, and PD is a good halfway house to learn and to get on side with the banks and things like that. So we only set the company up like 4 or 5 years ago. We've done one permitted development office to Resi in Uxbridge, and looking for new sites all the time. And I got introduced to yourself a while ago, and it sounded quite interesting. So we thought we'd give it a go, to take on board a VA and try and do a lot of the legwork, because some of it's quite tedious and as far as I'm concerned, quite boring. And if we were outsourcing that to somebody in the UK, that'd be very expensive. So being able to use somebody overseas to do a lot of the legwork is being really, really invaluable for us. And I think we started 18 months ago, 16 months ago, something like that. And there's obviously a process of understanding how everybody works and what works as far as getting responses back and things like that. And we were quite lucky in some respects. We got sort of a nibble quite early on, which certainly incentivized us to carry on with the process. Unfortunately, that didn't really come to sort of any fruition. But a lot of the time, these are slow burns. These take a long time to percolate and mature, not just once you've opened up conversations, but just from the initial letter or letters that go out. It might well sit on somebody's desk for 6 months or a year before they make contact. So even if you're not getting a response, a phone call, an email, a letter back, you can guarantee for every one that you get, there's one or two that's just sat on somebody's, okay, if we ever think of selling, we'll reach out to them.
It's quite funny you say that. I've experienced that myself. You will get some people who'll come back to you quite quickly, maybe from a first letter. Sometimes it takes maybe 2 or 3 touch points to build that trust and rapport. And then there's other instances where I can give you several examples where they've come back to us after 3 years, believe it or not. But you're 100% right. It goes in the top drawer, it goes in a filing cabinet. It'll come out when it's convenient to them. I had one recently where the dad got 3 letters from us, never contacted me, and then fast forward probably about 7-8 months later, out of the blue, he calls me up and he said, "Look, Dave, I do apologize. I did get your letters, but look, I was just coming to retirement. I was kind of selling up the business. I've been a contractor all my life. My dad's been a contractor all my life, all his life, and now I've got no sons to pass this site on to. My daughter's just told me she's getting married, so now I've got to deal with retirement and a marriage. So yeah, if you're still interested in buying the site, I'd be quite interested to open a dialogue with you now." And that's quite typical. It really comes down to their timescales. So you've mentioned you look for PD, permitted development. Do you look for the sites that are already consented, or do you actually like getting the PD yourself?
We've looked at both. To start with, we were looking solely at non-consented approaches, and the one that we actually secured recently that I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute was a consented site previously, and actually it lapsed. So when we were going through that negotiation, we felt very strong, even though the PD rules have changed, that we would be able to get PD on it. And yeah, I think when you get approached by a vendor, typically they've got a few questions that always come out. One is, where did you get my information from? Which is obviously publicly available, so you can explain where that's come from. And the other one is, how much is my site worth? And they want to know straight off the bat, without any information and given to ourselves, to be able to formulate that. They assume you've run a valuation on everything before you go from that. Before, when you pick up the phone call, you can just give them a number. So it's quite important to kind of set them on the right track from those early conversations, because to be able to value a site properly, you need a lot of information, and if you can get that rapport with them, it helps being able to determine what a site is worth to yourself, and that, I think, has been key when we've tied up this deal, was just kind of getting as much information about the vendor, about the site, about what we could do with it potentially, and find out what was important. And then off the back of all of that, you can go away, do your research, and hopefully formulate an offer that works with them, not against them, because I think there's a perception that developers are money grabbing horrible people, and they will only stitch you up, and not get a best value for things. But a lot of the time, you can help somebody's you can help somebody out in a situation, or try and think creatively that works for everybody's favor.
You're 100% right. It's all about building that trust and rapport, and it's finding out as much as you can about the vendor, their circumstances, their requirements. And you'd be surprised, it's not all about the money. People think, I've lost this deal because I haven't paid enough, someone else has overpaid. It's not. It's just that you haven't really structured a win-win, something that's going to work for everyone. I mean, what I mean there is, I've structured deals in the past where I joint venture a lot with landowners, and some want cash, some don't, because they're already high tax income earners already. So they're more interested in building a portfolio, and they're coming up to retirement, so they want income, they want passive income. So we can structure deals where maybe they come and joint venture with us, but maybe they become part of the development. They get some units at the end they're all unencumbered, so there's no mortgage, and then they're all income producing as well off the back of it. So some people like portfolio, some want income, some want a return. Some actually, believe it or not, I've joint venture with people where they just want education as well as a return. So you're there teaching them all about planning and architecture, finding sites, raising funds, doing deals, delivering our projects, and that's more valuable to them. But you won't know this until you actually have multiple conversations with people, direct to vendor, sit them down, have a chat, explore what they want, why they want it, what their exits are, where do they see themselves in, say, 5 or 10 years time. One conversation kind of springs to mind, actually, was with a girl who had a commercial unit, and I was happy to buy it, but I offered a joint venture. I explained what a JV was, and I asked her a very important question, and now I do this with all my vendors. I always ask them, what's important to you in this joint venture? And she thought long and hard, and then she said, well, Dave, my daughter's in her 20s. She's my single daughter, my only daughter. And I need to make sure she's taken care of and provided for. And I said, okay. So I said, kind of leaving a bit of a legacy for your daughter then is important. And she said, yeah, 100%. So I said, okay, great. Well, if you do joint venture with me, not only will you get your land value, but I'll be getting the planning. So there's a planning uplift you can tap into as well. And also I'll be building this out. So you'll end up with maybe, she couldn't sell the site. I think she was trying to sell it for about 550,000 comes to mind. And there was 900 grand profit, and we agreed a 50-50 profit share. So she was actually getting $1 million out of the deal. She couldn't sell it for 550, but now she was getting 3 units, totaling nearly £1 million, together with a small portion of cash. Which I helped her set the company up with her daughter to be part of the SPV. And that's what she did. She got 3 apartments, a lump of cash, all because she joint ventured. And that was important to her because those 3 properties were actually her inheritance that she was going to be giving her only daughter. It's about kind of structuring something that's going to work for everyone. And like I said, a lot of these deals you see online are not going to tell you all this, and you're not going to be able to find out either because there's going to be too much competition. But when you go direct to vendor and there's no other competition, there's no one else fighting for the site, and you're not having to overpay for it, you're able to sit down with these people and really kind of get to know them and explore, how can this work for everyone?
Yeah, and I think it's really important. It's building up that rapport. It does take time. It takes time to understand somebody's situation, and for them to give you the information that you need to go away. Some of that can be quite sensitive. So you've got to be, for example, the one that we're buying at the moment, had tenants, and when I went and looked at the building, I sort of had to put a little sort of tell a bit of a white lie when we were walking around, because he didn't want to upset the tenants unnecessarily. But sort of happy to do that because it sort of greased the wheels, and we were able to kind of glean information out of the situation. And that is so key. Just thinking about our site, he was going for a divorce, so needed to sell the site. But for him, he's clearly a successful person, ran multiple businesses and things. And so, the bottom line wasn't the be all and end all. And for him, it was more about knowing the number that he was working to with his wife, who also owned the building. Not splitting hairs over 50 grand, 100 grand. It was more, okay, we know the number we're plugging in to our settlement numbers, and getting that bit done. And then we were able to structure the deal around that. And once we'd understood the situation with all the tenants and when they were likely to vacate and things like that, we were able to, in our favour, I would say, we were able to do a sort of exchange with a delayed completion, which enabled us to go away and get the new PD. It's enabling us as we speak to go out to tender, do all the detailed pack and detailed design on the build. So then when we complete in September, we can hit the ground running, and that saved us
huge amount of time and cost
on 100 grand plus on holding costs. But what that's also allowed us to do was able to knock off 100 grand, because that was what the tenants were paying. So we were able to say, well, actually, while we're paying you X, we're really paying you X plus the rent that you're going to receive in the downturn, which worked for them. So they were able to sort of justify, I think, a reasonable deal on our part, and got them down by, well, about $500,000 from where they started off and where they wanted to be buying us buying the site at.
So tell us a little bit about the site in question. So let's start with the platform you use, maybe an example of how the VA was using it, and then you came across this site, and maybe just explain to everyone what that site looked like, and then we can try and maybe build up.
Yeah, so we use Nimbus. I think there are other platforms out there to sort of search and mine this data. And the VA was sort of fully trained on that when we took her on, and we provided a sort of template letters, letter 1, letter 2, letter 3, and we were just going through the motions of sending out letters, once every couple of weeks, out to a good number of people, being honest, and always within a week, 10 days of those letters going out, I always get a handful of calls or emails basically saying, we've received your letter, we're not interested, or we are interested, we'll file it, or whatever. And that's sort of to be expected, but not very often do you hit the holy grail and somebody turns around and says, oh, actually, I've had your letter land, I'm really interested in selling it. Case in point, we had sent this letter out, I think it was in February or March of 24, so just over a year ago, and the owner didn't contact us until September that year, so last September, so a good 6-7 months after we'd sent that letter out, we got that first contact with them, which was a phone call saying, I'm thinking of selling the site, and we took it from there, and then we sort of nurtured that relationship with the owner, sort of picked up on cues about the sort of personality type that they were, and tried to tailor the way I spoke to him, the way I presented myself with offers and emails in a manner that I felt he would warm to. And I think that was obviously evident because we were able to tie up a deal, that we're very happy with. We got the deal sort of done we actually ended up, because I felt it was a really good deal, we managed to get it on an option agreement.
Amazing.
Only a very, very short option agreement, but we had agreed we were going to exchange once the searches were done. But this was now in November, December, and I didn't want to wait 8 weeks over Christmas and maybe him getting cold feet or having somebody else. So we tied up an option agreement where we paid 10 grand. That was non-refundable. But to be honest, we were always going to be buying the site irrespective of whether or not it had planning, or we were buying it unencumbered because we felt we knew enough about it that we were in a strong position, but we wanted to lock him in. So we put it on a very short option agreement. That was, as I say, beginning of December, I think, with a view that we were going to apply for planning in the new year, and re-secure the PD. And then about 2 weeks before Christmas, I had a great idea that it's about 10 days before Christmas, that actually I wanted to try and get the application in before Christmas, because I realised if I got the application...
It'll count towards your 56 days.
Yeah, and what then would happen was by the time we had to exchange, we would have had PD back. So we put it in, thanks to my planning consultants and architects and everything, we got it in just literally a day before Christmas on 26th, I think it was. No, brilliant. 24th or 23rd or something like that, with the light reports and, all of this stuff. And we secured the PD before we actually needed to move to exchange. So just from our end, it just gave us that bit more confidence, to move to exchange, having secured PD and having retweaked the scheme that he had done originally. We had managed to get an extra unit, and all of his units were sort of open plan studio sort of apartments. And just purely by reconfiguring the space, we were able to make them into 1 beds and 2 apartments. So we increased the GDV from what we had agreed on the purchase price, because we were working on his numbers, his scheme, which he was happy to do. So all of a sudden, getting an extra unit and making these studios into 1 bed. So, we were sort of pretty happy with ourselves on that front.
Brilliant. And the reason he didn't want to go through the planning process is just purely because he was getting divorced and he just didn't.
Yeah, I think, even if they'd already had PD on it, they built the site, as it happens, which were 2 small office buildings. And again, this for us was like a brilliant property mix, because it's 2 smaller buildings. It gives us a lot of flexibility. We could get PD on them, we could sell them individually, we can develop them both, we can do one, rent the other, and then do the other, and rent the one that's built. We can JV with somebody. It just gave us so many different options, and still does give us so many different options, and we want to try and build a portfolio. But if the numbers don't quite stack, we've got that ability to title split and sell off one of the buildings without it affecting the value to an investor, because we're selling out flats. So we'll have 2 standalone buildings with 6 or 7 flats in each of them, which just allows us, if we wanted to sell 3 or 4 of the flats, we're not jeopardizing the other 9 or whatever the number is. We're only jeopardizing the rest in that building. But it just gives us that flexibility to get more equity, get some more cash in the bank if need be. So for us, there was a lot of reasons why we really like this as a deal.
I really like your approach with not just taking it as is. It's got X amount of units, and they're mainly large studios. You were quite creative enough to find that uplift, whether it's putting in partition walls, putting in like water changing into 1 bedroom, finding another apartment there. We've done the same in a site over in Woking, where we had a positive pre-app for 25 apartments, and the deal didn't stack at 2 million. But we looked at the floor plans and we knew we could take out the cycle and the bin store and put it elsewhere on the site. We knew we could give all the apartments on the ground floor their own entrance, and that would free up a load of communal space on the ground floor that could be amalgamated into apartments. Some of the flats were a little bit too big, so we kind of resized them, and we actually managed to squeeze another 7 apartments out of the same scheme, the same building over 4. We're doing a Class ZA demolition and rebuild, but under the same existing footprint, we managed to squeeze another 7 apartments out of that. And I'll just tell you a story for a reason, because most people will look at deals and they can't get them to stack, and they'll just put it to the side as quickly as possible and move on to the others. The real value is seeing what's there, or maybe seeing what isn't there but no one else can see, and adding value.
100%. And I think what's something we're learning as well is when you're looking at the planning side of finding mining for sites, sometimes people just go in for the path of least resistance because they've no intention of building out. They just want to get a conversion or whatever. They just want the planning without too much thought on actually what really works well there. They've created the value and they're happy with that, and they're also sort of open to the idea of other people making some value, in terms of when they trade it on or sell it on. So I think it's really important. Just because it's got something doesn't mean you have to stick with it. You can
indeed
play around with it and get creative. And certainly in London, they're a high value area. Getting an extra
apartment or even X amount of square foot can be really valuable.
Or it just tips over it goes from one national space standard size and it tips it into the next size, and then you created value just by playing around with a few bits and pieces, because that's really valuable. For example, if something's at 60 square meters, you may not quite be able to make it a 2-bed, but if you can get that extra 1 square meter somehow, hopefully you've got a good architect who doesn't mind didn't say that, creating that extra space, then you can suddenly make it a large 1-bed into a 2-bed, and you just created another 100 grand really out of thin air.
Something you've just mentioned as well about the multiple options. You could joint venture, you could title split off, you can develop out, you can develop and rent. That's the beauty about finding that site and adding that, planning uplift. It gives you that multiple options. You can sell, you can trade on, you can JV, you can develop out. But most people don't realize, when they just purely look for consented schemes because it's the lowest hanging fruit out there, it just leaves you one parachute to open, which is to build out. And if the market changes, or if you desperately need to sell, you're not going to be getting your funds back. You're not going to be breaking even if you bought it already with consent. So that's what we try and do as well. We like building out. We also like the planning system. We like flipping sites. And I think if you do a mixture of building out, putting some stuff in the planning and coming out of planning and tying some stuff up on a regular basis, you'd have that kind of conveyor belt where you're always going to be working on something, you're always going to be developing out, you're always flipping something, and you're always going to be kind of trading stuff on. So that's ultimately the kind of goal that we all kind of need to be working for towards with all this. Josh, you're working with the VA. She's looking into them, but she's finding sites, primarily PD. You're sending some letters. You've had some good responses back already. You've tied up a site. You're progressing with the planning. What was your experience like before using a VA? Were you relying on estate agents? You know, what was it? What were you relying on? How were you
Sort of
getting
mixed bag. You know, we were looking, and still do look for a lot of stuff at auction. You know, I think there's a lot of value in that. You know, there's certainty and speed, you know, which vendors like, and if you're buying something, working on something, I quite like as well, because you have the you have the certainty that you're not wasting your time and energy. You bought it, or will soon to be buying it. That said, you at auction you have to look at a lot of stock, run your numbers, and then be very diligent about what you pay for it, and not to get carried away. The other downside with that approach, certainly if you're trying to buy something that's unconsented, even with the alleged 56 day, but it never is, because you have to spend 3 or 4 weeks minimum pulling together all the information. Then you submit, and certainly with our first project, the council were incredibly challenging and difficult, and they kicked back our first application because apparently we made a bedroom too big. Didn't know that was possible, you know. But what it did was it meant we had to reset and resubmit, and that's another 56 days. Then they said they didn't follow their protocol, even though they did on the first application, they didn't on the second. So in the end, you know, I think we were running about 4 or 5 months through the PD process. So it's rarely, other than the one that we've just done, where we actually got it back, I think, in about 50 days, you know, does it move that quickly. And I think you have to anticipate probably at least the 6-month hold period before you could properly entertain getting on site, but probably just a 6-month period to actually where you get planning before you look to start building out. And that for us, you know, was a huge learning curve for you know, because your holding costs can be huge. And again, just by structuring a deal a little bit more cleverly, yeah, you can reduce or negate those costs entirely. So
for me, I mean, I love hearing your approach with the auctions, but for me, I think I'm a little bit. I work with investors. I work with banks. Investors typically are not the quickest type of funding out there. There's a lot of contracts and legal agreements and everything else that need to be signed, and funds to be transferred into the country sometimes if needs be. So I've never really explored the auction. I just felt, you know, for me, I had to go direct to vendor. I had to kind of build that relationship and then start piecing it together. Are they involved in the deal? What investors am I using? What planning do I need to sort out? So for me, it was always just sending the letters, building the rapport, structure a deal that wins, everyone wins out of. And like you said, it does take a little bit of time. You know, it can take a few weeks, it can take a few months to even just get all the structure right, the funding in place, and even the planning in place before you're on site. So yeah, I think that's probably, it kind of suits my type of work ethic as well. You know, I'm not the type of person that rushes the process either. I'm not saying anyone is, but I'm just saying I like taking it slowly. I like doing everything correctly, contracts in order, and then obviously, you know, we're into the whole kind of planning phase.
I think with all of it, it's a mix. You know, we direct to vendor, we have stuff with agents, yeah, and we pick stuff at auction. You know, and yeah, there isn't a right or wrong way. You know, they're horses for courses, and there are pros and cons to all routes and means. You know, so it's just important to understand as much as you can about a property and its reason for being sold. You know, you know, whether that's at auction or whatever. You know, we had an amazing deal last year that we picked up at auction that went through 3 auctions, you know, and we were able to make, you know, 230 grand in 4 months. Yeah, really simple stuff. It was there for everybody to see, but it's just understanding the property, where the opportunity is, and hopefully thinking a little bit creatively in one form or another to be able to come up with something that nobody else has come up with, or bottom out why other people aren't buying something.
Again, it's just seeing what, like you said, seeing what no one else can see, spotting that value add, creating that value. So Josh, there's going to be a few people who are probably using VAs who've got a huge amount of value from this. There's probably people who are maybe contemplating this or sitting on the fence. What would you say to anyone who's maybe considering taking up the services of using a VA to help them with this?
Yeah, I would say do it is the short answer. You know, it's not cheap, but it's well worth, I think, the investment. You only need one deal to land, and it more than makes up for you know, the investment in setting up, the investment in sending out letters and things like that. As I say, we've only tied up one at the moment, but we were very close on another one. And if we'd got that over the line as well, you know, the investment's been paid back 100 times over, and some, you know, so it makes sense to do it for sure. But as with all these things, it's consistency. It's yeah, you can't just do it once and expect to get results. You have to do it over a period of time, and then you have to follow up. You know, the power of the follow up is key in anything that you do. And yeah, pretty much all the offers we put out there, you know, unless it's gone to auction or something like that, yeah, we will be following up if we're not successful, and just keep hounding the agent, keep not hounding the buyer, the seller, you know, but just say, look, are you interested? These are my numbers before, I know you rejected or whatever. Because if a property hasn't sold 6 months down the road, yeah, this is why I do quite like some of the things that have been on the market, because if a property hasn't been sold, you know, a vendor might be getting desperate. And if nobody else is buying it, or they've been incredibly unlucky, you know, they might take 20p on the pound or 50p on the pound just to be done with it and moved on with other assets. And a lot of people you'll find with properties that have been on the market is they will have spent the money mentally and are desperate to kind of just get it in the bank. So that's sometimes why it can be a bit hard for them to take a reduced offer. But if you can keep chipping away and keep, you know, just keep in touch and being very pleasant about it, you know, but people's situations change. You know, we have one that we're talking to at the moment. You know, it's very sad, but he's been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and he wants to get his affairs in order, you know, so that's not left with his sort of elderly wife and things, who's never really been involved in the business. So, you know, just things like that, you know, when that time ticks away, they become more receptive to having a conversation, and it's not a question of, you know, there's an opportunity to stick someone over. It's actually an opportunity to sort out a problem that they've got and come up with a solution that really works for them. And I think that's really important. And that's where that rapport in, you know, however you've been made that contact with an owner is really important.
Yeah. You mentioned 2 things there that were very apt: consistency and follow-up. And yeah, a lot of people think you can just go on a site finding software like Searchland or Nimbus, spend a few hours here and there, send a handful of letters, and expect the world to change. The reality is, you know, you do need to be putting in 20, 30, 40 hours a week, every single week, for a good number of months to send out a few good 100 letters. You are going to get X amount back. You'll kiss a few frogs, you'll analyze a few deals, you'll make a few offers. Some will stick, some won't. Some won't come back to you. Some will come back to you after, you know, 6, 12, 18, 24 months. That's the reality of it. But, you know, it's all about what you said as well, the follow-up. You make those offers, you follow up, and you stay in contact. You know, from my agency days, 1 in 3 deals fall apart. And, you know, if you're not following up, your competition will be. This is the beauty about the VA. She'll use the system, she'll follow the process, she'll find the site, she'll send the letters, so you don't actually have to spend 20 or 30, 40 hours every week. She'll do all the follow-ups, she'll send all the follow-up letters, and she'll basically create the opportunities.
Yeah, it's really key. The follow-up, the power of the follow-up. Most developers I know, they've secured their sites, after a long time of following up, actually. And they could be direct to vendor, and a lot of them have been, but it really is important, because you just don't know what's going on, and if there is an agent involved, they're desperate, well, not desperate, but they want their commission out of it.
Of course they do.
And out of bed, and you just, as with anything in life, you pick up the phone at the right time, and you just stay on the radar. Hopefully you potentially be that person that they do pick up the phone to and get back in contact with you.
And remember, that agent, he doesn't want his commission, so your offer will always be behind everyone who might be purely cash. It'll be behind anyone who probably can overpay because they've got their own in-house build team, so they can build a lot cheaper than you. So there's a whole load of riding factors there that will always kind of push your offer down the ranks. And what people don't realize as well is, they find one site, they get all excited, they'll spend the next 18, 24 months building it out and selling it. And then, because no one's been finding sites, sending letters and building those relationships and creating those opportunities, they're back to square one, and it takes them another 6, 12, 18 months to find the site. So you're making money every, say, 4 years, 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, and that's so true. I mean, we were a case in point, quite frankly. When we did our first deal, we wanted to get that over and done with, and our money was tied into that. We were looking for stuff, but we weren't really heavily pushing on it. And then that obviously came to an end, and then we were sort of in sort of a position where we had to sit on a lot of cash, but no deal to really put into it, which is partly why we did a couple of flips at auction, which allowed us to use our money whilst we were trying to build that pipeline up. And it's always challenging to get it right, but if you get a good enough deal, the money will come from somewhere.
100%. Yeah, it always does. Joshua, thank you so much for spending time with us today, sharing your insights, and it's been amazing. I really appreciate all the value that you brought to the conversation today. And for anyone listening or tuning in and watching this who might have some questions on will this work for them? What does it look like working with a VA? What type of sites can they find? What kind of deals potentially could we find? Then please do feel free to reach out. Let's have a chat, and I can explain how it all works.
Yeah, and I'm happy, David, if you want to share my contact details, if people want a closed door conversation about it all, and but fundamentally, it's not perfect, but it's a very worthwhile investment.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Joshua. That's really valuable. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And look forward to speaking with you all in due course. Bye for now.
Bye. Thanks.